There's a moment that happens quietly, usually when no one else notices. You finish a conversation and walk away feeling slightly unsettled. Nothing dramatic was said. No argument. No conflict. Just a normal exchange. And yet something sits heavy in your chest. Later, you replay it in your head. Why did you tell them that? Why did you explain so much? Why did you assume they needed to know? You weren't being careless. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You were just being open, the way you were taught to be. But somewhere along the way, life teaches a harder lesson. One most people only learn after paying for it emotionally. Not everyone who asks cares. Not everyone who listens is safe. And not everything about your life needs to be shared. This isn't about becoming distant or guarded. It's about becoming selective. By the time you reach your 60s and beyond, you've lived long enough to understand that peace doesn't come from being understood by everyone. It comes from protecting what's personal, what's earned, and what's still fragile. These are 9 things people learn, usually the hard way, to stop sharing as they get older. Not because they're bitter, not because they're afraid, but because they finally understand the cost of giving too much access. 1. Financial power. Money changes how people see you, even when they don't mean for it to. You mention that you're comfortable, or that you own something outright, or that you're managing just fine, and suddenly the questions become more frequent, more specific, sometimes wrapped in humor, sometimes framed as concern. Over time, you notice expectations forming, small ones at first, subtle assumptions, a sense that you're supposed to help, explain, or justify what you have. Your finances are not just numbers. They represent independence, control, choice. When you share too much, you give others a reason to feel entitled to something that took you a lifetime to build. Privacy keeps your power intact. When people don't know what you have, they're forced to relate to you, not your resources. 2. Identity beyond past mistakes. As life slows down, the past gets louder. There's a temptation to explain old decisions, to tell the full story, to finally be understood. But what often happens instead is this. People latch onto the weakest chapter and ignore everything that came after it. They remember the mistake, not the growth, the failure, not the resilience. You end up defending a version of yourself that no longer exists. Your past shaped you, but it does not define you. You don't owe anyone a detailed account of how you learned your lessons. The fact that you did learn them is enough. You are allowed to move forward without dragging every old explanation behind you. Growth doesn't need witnesses to be real. 3. Family dignity. Family issues carry weight, and once you set them down outside the home, they're rarely handled with care. You may share out of frustration, or loneliness, or because you just needed to say it out loud. But once those words leave you, they take on a life of their own. Stories get repeated, opinions get formed, sides get taken, and suddenly, private struggles become public judgment. Protecting your family's dignity doesn't mean pretending everything is perfect. It means understanding that not everyone deserves a seat at your table. Some conversations weaken bonds instead of strengthening them. Silence, in this case, is not avoidance, it's protection. 4. Autonomy and your future self. Later in life, your plans become quieter, but they matter more. Maybe you're thinking about moving, changing how you live, spending your time differently. And the moment you say it out loud, the commentary begins. Are you sure? Is that realistic? Why now? What starts as conversation slowly becomes pressure. And before you realize it, the excitement you felt begins to fade. Some plans need silence to survive. You don't need permission to shape your future. You need space to move toward it without interference. Not everyone needs to understand your next chapter. Some people only need to see that you're at peace with it. 5. Physical vulnerability. Your body tells a different story than it used to, and that's natural. But when every interaction becomes a health update, people stop seeing your presence and start seeing your condition. Concern turns into pity. Curiosity turns into advice you didn't ask for. Your health deserves care, not commentary. Sharing selectively preserves dignity. You are more than your symptoms, and you don't need to remind the world of your limitations. Strength isn't pretending nothing hurts. It's choosing not to let pain become your identity. 6. Emotional vulnerability. Some people simply don't know what to do with honesty. You open up, and instead of feeling lighter, you feel exposed, misunderstood, sometimes even regretting that you said anything at all. Not every listener is capable of holding your truth without reshaping it. Emotional maturity isn't about constant sharing. It's about discernment. Your inner world deserves protection. Peace grows when you stop handing it to people who don't know how to hold it. You don't need to explain every feeling to validate it. Some emotions are meant to be processed quietly, not performed publicly. 7. Unresolved history. Old conflicts have a way of resurfacing when life gets quieter. You retell a story from years ago, thinking it will finally lose its sting. Instead, it sharpens. Each retelling pulls the past into the present and keeps old emotions alive. You don't heal by replaying yesterday's battles. You heal by deciding they no longer deserve your energy. The past doesn't need witnesses, it needs release. You are not obligated to carry old pain just because it's familiar. Peace begins the moment you stop reopening doors that should stay closed. 8. Personal sovereignty. How you choose to live, your routines, your boundaries, your solitude, doesn't require explanation. But the more you explain, the more people feel entitled to weigh in. Questions turn into judgments. Suggestions turn into expectations. Privacy restores balance. Silence reinforces freedom. You've earned the right to live on your own terms without defending every choice. You don't need approval to choose peace. Your life doesn't need to make sense to anyone but you. 9. Quiet joy and blessings. Later in life, joy becomes quieter and more precious. When something good happens, the instinct is to share it. But not everyone receives good news with a clean heart. Comparison creeps in. Envy hides behind smiles. Some blessings grow stronger when they're kept close. Gratitude doesn't need an audience. Peace speaks for itself. Happiness doesn't need to be announced to be real. Sometimes protecting joy is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. If you've stayed with this message, it says something about where you are in life. It says you value calm over noise, clarity over explanation, self-respect over approval. And that's not something you learn quickly. That's something you earn. Thank you for giving this time your attention. Truly. It matters more than you know. If one of these points stood out to you, sit with it. And if you know someone who's learning these lessons the hard way, pass this along. Protect your peace. Be selective with your story. And remember, life often becomes lighter when you stop explaining it to people who were never meant to carry it. You've earned that quiet,